In the last module, we started talking about root cause analysis, and we got into a common technique that's used, five whys analysis. Now, we didn't quite finish up five whys analysis, but we laid the foundation for understanding five whys and how to use five whys. Different companies have a lot of different forms for five whys analysis. Here's an example. I don't really like this one. Again, let's just go back. I like just laying it out like this, like we did in the previous module, without any specific forms. But that's up to you. That's up to the company you work for. I click through this. I don't really like this, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. Again, what is the problem? Why did this happen? Then why did the next thing happen? And so on and so forth until you get to the end. And it's called five whys, like we said in the last module, but it could be 6, could be 7, could be 4 different iterations of questions before you get to where you think you have identified the root cause of the problem. Here's another form. This is a form we used at Kiewit, which again I didn't really like it either. I mean, I used it, and that's going to be your position. You go to work for a company, they've already got a system in place. You're not going to go in and change it overnight. Now, if there's something that does need to be changed, you might over time be able to make recommendations and get some changes implemented. But that shouldn't be your goal. Going into a company and you're going to change everything overnight, you're going to get a lot of kickback from the people who are already there if you try that. So not a good idea to go in and try to change everything. And this is fine, but I'd rather do it just the simpler way. Now here is an example of a root cause analysis for an incident that occurred on one of my jobs when I was with Kiewit. What happened in this incident, we were using these Ranger Polaris UTVs, these all-terrain utility vehicles. We were out in the mountains, and one of the operators really wasn't qualified to be running the thing. The thing ended up tipping over on him, and he ended up with minor injuries. It wasn't a recordable injury, but it was still, we took everything seriously. It could have been serious. It could have been serious injuries. So we treat everything, even the near misses, like it was a life or death type of situation, because that can help us prevent serious incidents down the road. But again, this was the problem. First question, why did the problem occur? Wrong tool, personnel using the wrong equipment, using the wrong equipment and operator on uneven terrain. And it wasn't even the right piece of equipment for that situation. And the operator was definitely not the right operator for that piece of equipment. So why did we have the wrong piece of equipment and the wrong operator? Planning. Failure to come up with the best plan for performing the task safely. The planning for operations should include training, evaluation of operators, and identifying operators qualified for operating the UTV. This was not done. Why wasn't it done? Because we didn't recognize it, or management didn't recognize the hazard. Failure to recognize the hazards associated with the operation and the hazards associated with operating a UTV. Why didn't they recognize the hazard? They jumped to the assumption that it was a simple task with simple equipment that anyone could operate. Why was this assumption made? It was a failure of site supervision. That was the root that I arrived at during my investigation. It was a management failure. It was a project management failure. And here's more information about possible root causes, possible solution, and any additional notes. Just another example of five whys using a different kind of form. The process is still the same. You start with a why question and you keep asking why until you get at what you consider to be the root of the problem. All right, another tool that can be helpful that I've used a lot of in my investigations is called the fishbone diagram, or the Ishikawa diagram. It was developed by a guy named Ishikawa in Japan. I don't remember how many years ago, but it's been around quite a few years, this particular approach. And this is just a tool. This is just a method. like the 5 whys is a method and a tool. But it's a graphic tool used to identify possible contributing factors to an incident. It focuses on the 6 M's. And there's several variations of the forms, but this is the one that I like, with the 6 M's identified as man, meaning workers or co-workers; material, could be wood, steel, or glass; machine, equipment characteristics; method, the work process; the milieu, or the work environment; and management decisions or indecisions that contribute, that may contribute to the incident. These are the 6 M's. There are different forms out there, different variations, but it's basically the same process. Here's an example of the fishbone diagram. Maybe you can see why it's called a fishbone diagram. It kind of looks like a fish skeleton with all the flesh torn away from it or boiled away from it. Again, we got management, method. Instead of milieu, I like to use the word environment. I mean, that breaks up the 6 M's, but I think the environment's more meaningful because that's what you're talking about here, the work environment. Then we have machine and material. Like I said, different variations. Some can be more complex, some can be simpler. When we use this tool, we won't always have a cause for each of these 6 categories. We may need more lines in each of the categories. Or maybe we're not going to use all of the lines. It's not necessary to completely fill this thing up when you're working through your analysis. But here's an example of the fishbone diagram that was used with the tip-over incident, the UTV tip-over. And this is just a brainstorming process, a critical thinking process. When we went through it, it was me, one of the district managers, the district safety manager, the project manager, and his superintendent. We sat around a table and looked at each of these different categories. What would be some possible causes originating in these different categorical areas that could have led to the tip over of the UTV? Under management, we got inadequate training, inadequate communications. There weren't clear instructions given. The chain of command wasn't working properly, which goes back perhaps to the organizational structure and administrative controls that management would have control over. We're talking about management really at the project level in this case. As far as factors associated with the people involved in the man category, we had an inexperienced operator. He didn't understand the equipment. He was also, his physical condition really wasn't suited for this piece of equipment. The guy weighed about 350 pounds. And when he would get in that UTV, it was a side-by-side UTV. I'll have some pictures of it coming up. When he would get in it, on the driver's side, the whole thing would almost tip over just under his weight. And that's not picking on anybody for being overweight. That's just the reality of it. I think his physical weight contributed to the tip over. Another interesting characteristic that may have helped contribute to the incident and made it hard for this person to manage, he was very resistant to instruction from others. He wasn't good at taking orders. He wasn't good from taking instructions. So this resulted in management just leaving him alone and letting him do on his own. He wants to use the ATV or UTV. Nobody's arguing with him. Okay, go do it. And this linked to what I consider to be an overconfidence, a cockiness. And really, I think it was rooted in, he needed to prove himself to others. He was 22, 23 years old. He was a younger worker trying to prove himself to the other workers on the job site. So along with this went the cockiness and the at least the appearance of confidence. As far as the method, the way the work was being done, we had inadequate planning, inadequate hazard recognition. The work location was really not suitable for this type of equipment and parking of this type of equipment. Also, he went off on his own. It was a solo job. There should have been somebody with him. If there had been someone with him, that could have prevented the incident. Because what happened, he ended up backing this thing onto a rock because he couldn't see the rock. And when he backed that rear tire up on the rock, that, along with his weight, resulted in the thing tipping over on its side. If he had had somebody with him, somebody spotting for him, he may have not ran over the rock. The environment certainly contributed, or the milieu where the work was taking place. It was uneven terrain, it was rocky terrain, and there really wasn't enough space to turn the machine around. And that's what he was trying to do when he had the incident. He was trying to turn around to go back up the slope. As he was backing up to make his turnaround, he ran over the rock that was in the area, and it tipped over. Characteristics of the machine that may have contributed: there weren't any rear view mirrors on the machine, which made it harder for him to see what was behind him. Certainly no backup cameras. Also, the machine had a higher center of gravity than maybe some other equipment would have had. A skid steer might have been a better option in this situation. What he was doing, he was hauling gear out of the area where they had already finished work for the day. He was told to, go get all the tools, round up all the tools, bring them back to the tool shed, bring them back to the trailer. And so he hops in here. He's going up there to get the tools. Higher center of gravity with this piece of equipment contributed. A skid steer could have been used to collect the tools and get everything back to the tool trailer also. Skid steer would not have gone over in this situation. As far as materials, there's really no materials that were applicable in this accident. But some of these other factors very likely contributed to the incident. So moving forward, these different possible factors need to be included in your final report, and moving further down the road from your final report may help prevent future incidents similar to this. Now, before this incident, we're going back several years, Kiewit actually had a policy that only designated people could drive these types of off-road vehicles, but that policy had been relaxed. When this incident occurred, there's a lot of discussion. Do we need to start enforcing that policy again, that only certain people had authority to drive these types of vehicles? Let's go ahead and look at some pictures of what we're talking about here. This is the incident investigation report that I prepared as a result of, again, the 5 whys analysis, the fishbone diagram. All of that was used. Now we're putting it all together in a report to document the incident, and hopefully information from this report could help prevent this in the future. But this is the vehicle we're talking about. There's the vehicle on its side. It hadn't been turned back over yet. This is the vehicle after we flipped it back up. This is the slope, looking at it from a different angle, and you can see this is his position when he started to make the backing motion or the backing maneuver to turn around and drive back up the slope. He came down the slope, the vehicle's pointing toward the pipeline. Now he's got the tools loaded up, he needs to back up and get out of there, go back up the slope. As he's backing, he ends up running onto the rock, and that tipped it over. Along with his 350 pounds of weight, it tipped over on the driver's side toward the side that was weighted down by his body weight. Here's some more of the report. Possible contributors. This is a summary of the fishbone diagram information. Then supporting documents attached, preventative measures, preventative options, and then additional notes. Yeah, that's an example of how the fishbone, the 5 whys, can be a part of your incident reports, incident investigation reports. Useful tools. Another thing we need to consider when talking about incident investigation is, what do we do with all of these materials that we generate during the report? Each incident should have its own file. That incident file for each of the incidents should include the original incident report, the OSHA 301 form if there was an injury. The OSHA 301 form, we'll talk about that during the very last unit, but it's a form that employers are supposed to fill out whenever they have an injury. The incident investigation report should also be included in the incident files, along with supporting documentation, including witness statements and photos and diagrams. The JSA that's applicable is also a good item to have in the incident file, along with any training records, inspection records, anything that may possibly pertain to the incident needs to be included in the file. If there's any injuries or drug testing or anything like that takes place, there could be clinical records. Now, if you do have clinical records associated with the file, best practice would be a separate file for anything that's confidential in nature. You don't want just anybody going into your files and looking up the person's medical information. If that happens, we're getting into a potential violation of HIPAA privacy laws. So we want a separate file for clinical records, post-accident drug screens, so on and so forth. Damage reports doesn't need its own file, but that could be included in the incident file, also should be. If there's a police report involved, a corrective action plan, which is your plan for preventing accidents like this in the future, you would want those in your incident files also. A lot of times when there's an incident, there needs to be a training response. Significant incidents may require training or retraining. When we had the UTV turnover, we got everybody in the district together and talked about it. Not all at one time. That'd be 500 people at one time. But we sent training material to the different crews. The different crews across the district discussed the incident so that we can have a better chance of preventing them into the future. But as far as who needs to be involved in any kind of training response or retraining response, the people involved in the incident, one thing about the people involved in the incident, you don't want to embarrass anybody. You don't want to point fingers at anybody. So you might even have a separate meeting just for the people involved. That's what I would recommend. But the whole company, ideally, will receive the information about the incident so that, again, we can prevent it in the future. We don't want it happening again. And there's a separate follow-up meeting for workers directly involved. In this training, you want to talk about what happened, how it happened, prevention measures. It doesn't have to be an all-day affair, 30 minutes, maybe even 15 or 20 minutes with each crew. Now, another Kiewit accident where we had this type of crew-level meeting across the company had to do with the quickie saw that kicked back in the guy's face. 15 minutes. Go in, here's what happened, here's why it happened, here's what we need to do to prevent it. Again, it could be this 15 to 30 minute meeting with each crew. It could be a mass safety meeting on a project. And if you're on a big project like the DFW connector project where there's hundreds of people, you could have a mass meeting at the beginning of a workday to discuss the incident. One of the examples of this that I got to experience was down in Texas. I don't remember the name of the job, but it was one of these mega jobs. It's been a long time ago, but they had a fatality on the job. And everybody on that job, we had a stand down for this meeting. Everybody on the job had to be at this mass safety meeting to discuss the incident. What happened, how we're going to keep it from happening in the future. Now, one thing that a lot of companies do, at Kiewit we did it, and I think it's a pretty good deal as far as getting the word out to the rest of the company. We called it Key Track, but it was a daily announcement. It was an email you'd get every day, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but daily announcement concerning any incidents occurring on company projects. The UTV incident, the tip over, that was on Key Track. There was an announcement, email sent out at the end of the day when that happened. The kickback with the quickie saw, same thing. There'd be 10 or 15 a day, Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday tended to be slower days because not everybody's working, but on a normal Monday through Friday work day, there'd be 10 to 15 incidents a day in a company the size of Kiewit that would be announced on Key Track. Now keep in mind what Kiewit considered an incident, a lot of companies would just sweep under the rug and forget it ever happened. But yeah, any kind of near miss, any kind of minor injury, certainly any major injuries or fatalities made it into Key Track. Another thing, and we're not really going to get to go into this, but companies need to keep good records about all of their accidents, all of their incidents, even the near misses. And periodically they need to update this information and reanalyze this information to identify trends. These trends can help us know the most common incidents. If we know what type of incident is most common, then we can focus more attention on that. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the semester in this class. I think I showed you some information from MRB where we had a breakdown of the most common incidents, and at MRB the most common type of incident involved a falling object. So when I was there, we had a real emphasis on trying to prevent falling or dropped object types of incidents. You could also identify what types of incidents are most expensive, what time of day the incidents are most likely to occur, what time of year. And that time of year is important. One thing I noticed in construction and other companies also have a term for this, summer slump. But the most dangerous time in construction is the end of July through the end of August. That's when you see a peak in the number of injury incidents. How do we know that? Because of years and years and years of data that shows that pattern being pretty persistent. And not just for one company, but most construction companies have that summer slump period where they see a peak in injury-related incidents. Other types of incidents also, vehicular incidents as well. You could also, at a large company like a Kiewit or an AECOM, you could identify what division is having the highest rates, highest numbers of incidents, and that might be a signal to the corporate safety director, hey, they need to spend more time focusing on that particular division. You could also identify different associations. What is related to the injury rates? Maybe it's training. You see that the divisions that place more emphasis on training have lower injury rates, or you might see vice versa. Length of employment and incident rates. Supervisor buy-in also. I mean, there's a lot of different, you could do a whole class just on data analysis and identifying trends and making sense of those trends. But the goal is to keep good information and use that information to guide our safety operations. Earlier in the semester, I used the term data-driven. A good safety program is data-driven. A part of being a data-driven safety program, you got to have good incident investigations, you got to keep good records, and you've got to do good analysis of those records. All right, we are almost done with incident investigation. If you have any questions or anything about incident investigation, give me a call, send me an email, or send me a text. Let me just do a quick review of what we've covered in this unit, and then we will end this module. We've talked about how incident investigation can help prevent future incidents. We talked about the different requirements for completing a thorough investigation: preserving evidence, securing the site, preliminary reports, measurements, incident recreation, pictures, video, and interviewing witnesses. We talked about the tools and equipment that could be needed to perform an investigation. Talked about reviewing documents and the desk audit part of an investigation, using expert consultants, working with third-party investigators like OSHA or the insurance company or even the media. Wish I spent a little bit more time on media, but that's something that your company that you go to work for will probably have a policy on how to deal with the media. We talked about third-party complaints and employee complaints. Then we talked about root cause analysis, 5 whys, a fishbone analysis, and then we took a final look at an incident investigation report.